I've had my hands on the PlayStation Portal for almost a week now. I've been using it nonstop the past few days, trying it out in a variety of different situations, and I feel pretty confident now on giving my full thoughts about it. This has definitely been one of the more, I don't know if controversial is the right word for it, but something that I've seen a lot of mixed responses on because of the fact that it is a remote play focused device. I myself have certainly said my piece about how badly I would love a traditional handheld, and seeing this revealed was a little bit of a punch to the gut, but at the same time, it is a thing that I could absolutely see some people really making use of it. And my time with it has certainly adjusted some of these viewpoints. So let's get into it. Right away, I want to dive into the remote play experience with this thing. There's some other stuff I want to talk about with things like battery life and just the general comfortability of it, but obviously the big question here is, how well does this operate as a dedicated remote play device? Because again, it's not playing anything natively on the system itself. It has to have a PS5 to connect to. One thing I do want to clarify about this real quick is that I've seen a lot of confusion about how exactly the Portal works. I think part of this is due to the fact that it became a very widespread meme very quickly that PlayStation is just releasing effectively a Wii U, which isn't really the case at all. I get where the joke is coming from, but it also ends up actually giving a inaccurate depiction of how exactly the Portal works. It doesn't rely on directly connecting to the system. You don't have to be in the same room as your PlayStation 5. Instead, it actually relies on connecting to whatever your nearest Wi-Fi source is. So if anything, being close to your router is more important than being close to the system itself. But more importantly, this also means you can use it in a variety of locations outside of just simply where your PlayStation 5 is. I myself, the vast majority of my testing was actually playing the PS5 that was located here at my office while using the Portal back at my house. Two completely separate locations with different networks. Now, of course, because this is how it operates, your experience of this is going to vary a lot based on how good the internet is at your home or wherever you're trying to use the Portal, along with how good of a router you're using. This is one of the biggest hangups, I think, with Portal, is that you have to make sure you have a surrounding situation where you're able to really make use of it and get the most out of it. But when those conditions are met, it's honestly a very fluid experience. I don't know if I would necessarily say it is seamless, which is, I think, the eventual goal for stuff like remote play dedicated devices to really shine. But man, does it get close really often. There's a lot of situations, depending on where I'm using it or how strong the Wi-Fi is at a given moment, where there's going to be something that shows up a little bit to remind me that yes, this thing is not running its own games. Either because the resolution just gets a little fuzzier for a moment, maybe a game with a higher frame rate ends up seeing a couple dropped frames here and there. Sometimes input latency can be a little higher if you have a weaker signal. And I would say in my own personal experience with how well it's working across these things normally and how often these occasional reminders would crop up, it's not enough to ruin the core experience. There are multiple games that I was able to play very smoothly and have a great time with while using this device, not only including things that are less time dependent like turn-based RPGs, but also spending times in things like fighting games, action RPGs, games where timing does actually mean more and still works out. It's not quite as close as native. Again, you're getting a little bit of input delay, but it's not to the extent where it completely undersells the experience. I don't think I would necessarily vote for using this to do things competitively, where you actually have a track record that's going to get impacted and then you have to worry about how this might impact your performance. But in single player situations, times you're just trying to have some fun or maybe just grind out some levels, it 100% works, and in my experience has more often than not worked beautifully. One critique I've seen from a lot of people, rightfully so, is the fact that because it relies on a Wi-Fi connection, there are a lot of situations where it's not truly portable, right? Like you have to use it at home or at an office or somewhere where you have access to a good Wi-Fi plan, and not something you can just actually play physically on the go like you could with other portables like, say, the Switch. And actually, depending on your particular situations, there are ways you can do this. I actually connected the Portal to my phone's personal hotspot, where the experience was, yes, a little worse than connecting to my local Wi-Fi. One of the major things I noticed was that my input latency was a little higher, so I definitely did not want to rely on that as often for things where timing is really important. But the frame rate and visuals of the games still ended up looking great, as long as I had a decent cellular signal. I will also say there's just an element of fun with the way that PlayStation has set up the remote play on this device. Staying true to its name, Portal, the way it actually works is that when you first start it up and turn it on and connect to your system, it literally puts like a circular portal on the screen that will then load what's being displayed on your PlayStation 5 and then jump into it. I don't know, I just personally love fun little touches like that, and I love they went with this direction on that. One thing that is a little bit of a headache, and I'm sure there's some license right management issues or something for why this is the case, but as it stands right now, the Portal can only remote play games on your system. You do not have the ability to take advantage of any media streaming apps, and you can also not take advantage of cloud streaming apps on the system. What's really funny about this is that it actually doesn't stop the system from doing these things. Your system will begin to cloud play a game or launch a streaming app like Netflix, but the screen just basically goes black and says, hey, I can't show you what's currently running on your PS5 right now. Please hit the home button and go back away from it. Which I'm sure remote playing your PS5 and having it cloud play a game is far from an optimal setup, but especially when it comes to things like the media services, it just feels like you're kind of missing out on additional use for it. Now, obviously, how well the remote play signal works and everything isn't the only thing that determines, how good this device is. There's a whole lot that we need to talk about as well, including things like the battery life, the just general comfort of the controller itself. When I very first opened it and took a look at it, I thought that it was very similar to a DualSense controller, which it is, but it's actually not quite as one-to-one as I first thought. As I spent more time using it and going back and forth between it and a DualSense controller, the grips on it are actually ever so slightly smaller compared to a DualSense, along with these sticks being reduced in size as well. And the general button shape and allotment and everything just feels a little bit different. It actually seems like it's a little worse if you have smaller hands. I actually handed it to my wife to use for a little bit, and she had trouble using the sticks on it. For me personally, I found it to be pretty comfortable up front, but in the long run, it was slightly less comfortable than a DualSense. I've certainly had my very long playtime moments on PlayStation 5, hours on end, and had not had any major hand cramp issues on the DualSense. With the Portal, it's not immediate, it feels really comfortable up front, but I have seen that with long play times where you're approaching over 2 hours straight, I did begin to feel my hands be a little more cramped up and uncomfortable compared to when used on a DualSense. Not the worst, mind you, far better than using, say, a Switch without any kind of grip or larger Joy-Cons to adjust that and just has that flat body, but just not quite as good as what the DualSense offers. I will also say that on the subject of its slightly wackier looking design, one thing that does bother me is the fact that PlayStation has yet to reveal or release a carrying case for this. There are some handheld mobile devices where I feel okay not having a case, usually because, it's something that has a relatively generic shape, it can slide into other things really easily, or maybe just because it has such a brick-like design, I'm not too worried about anything getting scratched or messed up. But just because of the fact that while it does have a good feeling build quality, the way the screen is broken up from the rest of the controller part, I would really feel better having this stored in like a nice carrying case when I want to put it in my bag, and there's just no official option for that right now. I'm sure we're going to see some third-party companies jump on this as an opportunity. It would just be really nice if PlayStation had their own official one, especially considering the fact that they've made carrying cases for other devices like the DualSense Edge, which came with one. As for the display and speakers on the Portal, I love the display. Speakers are good, not my absolute favorite. As far as the display goes, I think it does a great job of displaying games the way they are meant to look. There's a really great use of colors here, great contrast. Overall, it is a wonderful looking display, especially when you have a strong enough signal to support smooth looking remote play. The speakers, on the other hand, they sound a little condensed to me. It's not like the worst sounding audio by any means, it's pretty solid, but just not quite as clear as I would like. Also, on the subject of headphones, one of the other things about the PlayStation Portal is that it does support PlayStation's new PlayStation Link technology that's going to be in their upcoming headsets, the Pulse Explorer and Pulse Elite. I have not had a chance to test that out yet because those have not actually been released yet. The Explorer is coming out in early December, so I am planning on covering that when it releases, and as part of that, I will absolutely dive into how PlayStation Link is working out on the Portal. Of course, another important aspect of handheld gaming devices is battery life, and I would say I'm overall pretty happy with how it is on the Portal. I mean, more is always better, but it's at least above a certain threshold that I find to be pretty solid for a handheld device, especially by today's standards. Part of the benefit of a remote play focused device is that because it's not actually running the games itself, it's just dealing with showing the video signal and pushing out sound, along with supporting all the DualSense features, which are probably actually a larger impact on the battery than anything. On a full charge, I've been having usually around 7-ish hours, I would say, of time on the Portal. Sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. The thing that really impacts this is, again, DualSense features. If you're playing games that involve a lot of haptics, they're using the adaptive triggers often, that kind of thing is going to impact the battery life of the Portal a lot more than what actual game you're specifically playing. Because again, it's not worrying about running the game, your PS5 is handling that load. Considering the fact that when you look at things like the Steam Deck having anywhere between 2 and 8 hours of battery life, depending on what kind of game you're playing on it, and the PlayStation Portal is able to play much more demanding looking games while maintaining the same general battery life on the higher end, I would say it generally lasts long enough for me. And again, because of the fact that it is something that's going to more often than not be rooted in your Wi-Fi, and you're going to be playing it probably in more home situations or places where you're actually going to be, sit and connect to the internet and not out and about walking on the go, you're likely going to have a power port somewhere to work with if you absolutely need to plug in and keep charging it while you're playing. Which I will say is one thing I do want to lightly ding, because it is its own dedicated handheld. Really bothers me that it doesn't come with its own actual charger. It ships with a C-to-C cable, so you can plug it into your PlayStation to charge it, or if you have your own brick with a USB-C port on it, which, to be fair, is becoming more and more common these days, and more than likely you do have some way of charging it conveniently. It would be nice if it had its own dedicated charger in my mind. Look, overall I have to admit, I'm pleasantly surprised with my general experience with the Portal. While there is absolutely a part of me that would prefer that they work on a more traditional native handheld and have that come out sometime and maybe supported remote play as an additional feature, that would certainly be my preference. But as far as something that is just specifically doing remote play and allows you to play your PlayStation 5 games in more comfortable experiences, because personally, I like playing handheld really often. There are a lot of times where even if I'm home and have access to a large TV, I like the experience of just laying back on a couch and having a handheld device in hand. And the Portal allows me to do that while still playing PS5 games with an experience that is not seamless, but not that far off from being one, at least with my Wi-Fi. I ended up using this a lot for doing things like checking in on Mortal Kombat 1 dailies and playing turn-based RPGs and JRPGs, and that is an experience I see myself continuing to have. I will note that for my particular situation, and something worth being aware of, if you're like me and really like holding on to physical copies for your games, that does limit its use cases a little bit in the sense of if you want to change the game you're playing and it's a physical game, obviously you can't do that if you're not around your PS5 because you need to swap the disc. If you've already gone all in on digital and you have a digital-focused PS5, or you just have a number of games that you know you're going to play regularly in rotation that you own digitally, that's not going to be as much of an issue. But if the vast majority of your games are physical, keep in mind that whatever disc is currently sitting in your PlayStation, that's the game you're going to be able to play right now with the Portal. As it stands right now, the Portal is honestly a really fun, solid device to use, provided you have the circumstances to support it. If you don't have access to higher speed internet, if you don't have a very good router, if there's not a whole lot of situations where you want to play it somewhere separate from your PlayStation 5, there's a whole lot of reasons why the Portal might not be a great fit for you. But if you happen to be in those circumstances, which I personally am, it's something I'm absolutely going to be using a lot of. And if I wasn't doing what I was doing, making these videos, and I had this knowledge though of the experience of using it, I would actually be tempted to spend $200 to grab one, especially if I only had access to a single PS5 that's being used in one primary location. So those are my thoughts on using the PlayStation Portal. I am planning on doing at least one more review style video for this where I'm focusing more on comparing it to other similar remote play situations and devices, like using it on a phone, for instance. We'll break all that down in a later video, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that. I am also planning on covering other PlayStation hardware coming out, like the Pulse Explorer next month and the Pulse Elite early next year. If you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button to let me know, and I will see you guys later.